listeners, and welcome to another episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. I remain your host, Jason Johnston Yellen, aka Jason Three Names, formerly known as Dramgalf. I'm joined on this wonderful, wonderful little podcast with Joshua Morrissey Hatton, aka the Whiskey Whippet, formerly the Whiskey Cherub, but boy, has he had a very productive lockdown and pandemic. Is that true?
I'm just nervous that people are actually going to think that my middle name is Morrissey. It is not. My middle name is not
They
Morrissey.
would be correct.
Because it's Joshua, the Pope of Mope, Morrissey Hatton.
Is that hyphenated?
The dash Pope dash of dash Mope. Yep, that checks out.
So each time we get together on Extra Extra, one of us brings a, oftentimes, whiskey-related news story to the attention of the other. We read over it in the first half of the episode, we riff on it over the second half of the episode, and we always try to get out of here in a tight 30 to 35 minutes. Boy, have we been very successful recently.
See, you said that, and now we may not, so
setting the table, Joshua. Yeah. Pro move.
Yeah.
So it's your turn to bring something to our attention, and you're being lazy, no surprise there, by using something that was sent to us.
Well, I definitely take umbrage to the use of word lazy when it's applied to me, because I don't feel like a lazy person, but maybe I am.
And yet.
And yet. So we got this email from Ian Bruce, who has, he's written in before, and we actually mentioned him on the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, because we let people know that we would likely be using this email/article for today's episode. So the email from Ian Bruce, which came in on August 8th, August 4th, or the 4th of August, depending on which country you live in.
But definitely not the 8th, regardless of your country.
Well, you know what I did is I looked at it and I tried to bro down with the rest of the world style of dating things, and I saw 8 led the charge there. And so I wanted to go with the 8th, but it's actually August 4. So the 8th month, the 4th day. Anyway, the headline, or not the headline, but the subject line reads, Musical Maturation, the Future of Enhancing a Profile, ? And so Ian says, good day, Joshua and Jason. Sorry, actually he said, good day, Jason and Joshua. I just naturally flipped it, kind of like the date. And he goes on, he said, I was wondering if you guys have read the article below, and if so, what would your views on sonic aging of casks? What type of music played really influenced the tastings, having some blues entice out some mellow profiling, and what wood flavorings do you think would come to the fore with playing prog rock? Oh, I love that he went with prog rock. And so he gives us the article, which comes from The Independent, by the way.
Okay.
And the headline says, this piper is serenading casks of whiskey to, quote, enhance its flavor. And then the subheader says, the concept dates back to the 18th century when whiskey was transported by sea. The author is Saman Javed. Hopefully I pronounced Saman's first name and surname correctly.
Slim chance of that.
It's a very slim chance. But I will tell you, here's an interesting thing. The headline, whiskey is spelled without the E, and the second word in the first sentence has whiskey spelled with the E, so...
We've discussed this previously, right? Oftentimes, the headlines are not written by the author of the piece.
Yeah.
So Salmon has submitted his article, and then some editor somewhere has applied a headline to it with a question mark. Headlines with question marks, no thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So, the article starts. It says, a whiskey brand has enlisted the help of a Scottish piper and whistle player to enhance the flavor of its drink. Ali Levac, Levack, Levack, a musician. Levack. There you go. A musician from Dingwall, a small town in the north of Scotland, has been playing.
We know it well.
Do we? Have we been to Dingwall?
Yeah, many times.
Okay, there you go. So Ali has been playing the tin whistle to casks of Wee Smokey's new limited edition whiskey. Last year, Levack's band, Project Smoke, auctioned off the naming rights of its new single on a bid to generate income following the cancellation of live gigs during the pandemic. At the time, Wee Smokey won the bid, and the single was named after the distillery. Now Wee Smokey has announced it is releasing a bottle of single-grain Scotch whiskey, which has been, quote, enhanced, end quote, by Levack in a process known as, quote, sonic aging. The concept
Did
of...
Did they just call that single-grain Scotch whiskey?
Single-grain Scotch whiskey, yeah. Please don't tell me you have a problem with that. That is a legal statement. That's what we use on our labels when we bottle Invergordon or Port Dundas. It always says single-grain Scotch whiskey.
Well, that's the part that surprises me. As you start reading this article, I just assume we're talking about a single malt distillery, and now it's described as single grain.
Right, and it says Wee Smokey. I only know of one distillery that produces a peated single grain. And maybe we can get into that a little later. The concept of sonic aging comes from a technique of aging whiskey at sea. And by the way, whiskey here on out is being spelled without the E. So I don't know what's happening here. So aging at sea, where vibrations from the movement of water to oak casks increase contact between the liquid and the wood, speeding up the aging process. In recent years, the concept has been adapted by distilleries, mostly in the U.S., which emulate these vibrations through sound. John Heron, founder of U.S.-based distillery Copper and Kings, previously spoke about the process in an interview with Billboard, explaining that musical notes pulsate through the barrel. This causes the alcohol molecule to move away from the sound wave. Sorry, the reason why I keep on saying sorry is window after window after window is popping up here. Reading this article is very infuriating because every time I get to a new sentence, I have a new ad jumping in the way. Anyway, I regret signing up for a free account with The Independent. Anyway, this causes the alcohol molecule to move away from the sound wave, hitting the wall of... What the fuck just happened?
Did your browser just crash?
The browser just like reloaded the thing. It reloaded all of the ads, so they're all popping up again. Here we go again. This causes the alcohol molecule to move away from the sound wave, hitting the wall of the barrel, sliding upwards until it loses momentum and then falling. The process, which repeats as the music plays, is thought to accelerate the interaction between alcohol and the wood of the casks. In a bid to enhance Wee Smokey's whiskey, Levack has been playing the tin whistle to casks of the liquor. And then this is a quote from Levack. Playing to whiskey casks was a new experience. I loved being part of the whole process, from playing our music to the whiskey while it aged to drinking it while listening to our recorded song, Levack said. Wee Smokey's founder, Rory Gamble, said it is the first time the brand has used the process for making its whiskey. Our best whiskey, oh my God, I can't read this article. Our best whiskey is best enjoyed with music, so it was natural to experiment to see how music could enhance the flavor, Gamble said. The Scotch Whisky Association told The Independent that under UK regulations, a traditional method of aging whiskey must be used alongside sonic aging. Quote, in the UK and EU, whiskey requires maturation for at least 3 years as long as the product meets the legal requirements in the country of sale. People are free to play whatever music to the whiskey they wish, a spokesperson for the association said. And that's it.
Thank goodness.
That's the article.
I'm not even experiencing this with you, but boy, oh boy, that was a process.
I was afraid, because I don't really read The Independent, though I do read The Atlantic. And I was in my head nervous that The Independent would be as long as an Atlantic article, and then I'd be dealing with all those pop-up ads, just like boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. That was frustrating AF as a Frenchman.
And just to bring you back, I think you mean as wide as an Atlantic article?
I do mean as wide. Thank you. Yeah, well put. I appreciate the Atlantic article's girth.
It's ocean humor. Come for the whiskey news, stay for the ocean humor.
I tell you, it only took you about 18 knots to get to that punchline, which was great. Did I do the ocean humor right?
Let's take a quick break and we'll come back for a wee riff. When I hear this topic, two things pop into my head simultaneously.
Okay.
Number one, everybody needs a story. Everybody needs an angle.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a point of difference.
Yeah.
And if your point of difference is a boat or music or first in your county since Prohibition, whatever it is, I understand everybody needs a hook. The other thing that pops into my head is Ralph and Gable Arenzo.
I'm so glad. That is exactly where my head was at. And so I'm so glad you brought this up. Please, please, please continue.
Right? They were doing this at Tuttletown. And maybe it's still done at Tuttletown. I don't know. I simply don't know. Maybe you do. But the fact that those two chaps, who I like a whole ton, and obviously we just recently lost Gable and that news was absolutely horrifying. But two great chaps who I felt were pretty authentic in their whiskey making, thought that these bass lines did something useful.
Yeah.
And while on the face of it, I kind of give it a bit of side eye, I also trust the Arenzos.
I do as well. I definitely trusted their belief that it did something. And what's not to say it doesn't work, right? Especially if you are, playing just the loudest gangster rap, which is basically what they did, just like big bass heavy rap. Like I have a feeling that could potentially do something. However, what wasn't in place, as far as I'm aware, and we don't know what measures are put into place with this distillery that's doing this project with Ali Levick, is we don't know if there's a control sample of two sister casks, one where music is being played to the cask and one where there isn't. But even then, that is not necessarily the best way to figure out if music is doing something. And, if you're going to bring history from 10 plus years ago about the Arenzos in Tuttletown doing, playing the music within their warehouse, I'll bring back a little history from the first Ben Riach we ever bottled, which was cask 2510. and we'd gotten two samples, Cask 2510 and Cask 2512. I think those numbers are correct. I could have them wrong. But my point is, both were 17 years old. Both were peated Benriach. Both were put into second fill bourbon barrels from the same, cooperage. I don't know if it was the same distillery, but definitely from the same cooperage. And those two whiskeys that had sat side by side for the past 17 years could not have been more different from one another. And as far as I'm aware, there were no musicians coming in to, have a private concert with one of the casks and not the other. So there's that. However, I do feel that there have been examples where the filling of sister casks and having them mature in different environments have worked out. And that's our friends at Milk and Honey, right? Where they put one cask in Tel Aviv and one cask in the Dead Sea, and you can clearly see the differences because of the temperatures, because of the barometric pressures, and so on. And you can see that happen within bourbon warehouses, right? Put one cask on the bottom floor, put one cask on the 5th or 6th floor, and different things are going to happen. I just don't know if you can say, hey, we played the music to this whiskey, and now it's made for a different whiskey. I just don't know how true it could be.
Yeah, the takeaway for me is often these are dealt with anecdotally.
Yeah.
And I quite like the way you parsed it a moment ago, where the Arenzos believed it made a difference to the whiskey that came out the door, right? That seemed like the important part of their process. They weren't necessarily arguing that all casks should have music played to them consistently to, say, create a better product. They just said, for us in our setup, here's what we are doing, and we think this is making a difference. Given the number of R&D departments that exist with a range of brands and corporations, in charge of multiple distilleries, they're exploring everything. And we've talked about it in the past, and it comes up a fair bit. Brands are looking into how can we reduce the angel share, but not, have a negative impact on the whiskey that we're trying to mature here, right? If a brand, a distillery could do away with loss overnight, but still put out the same whiskey the next day, they would go ahead and do it. And I think in the same vein, if they could put out a whiskey that matures faster because heavy bass beats were played 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they would do it. The fact that you only hear about these kind of one-off little marketing stories that raise their head above the parapet occasionally, I don't think scientifically there's really anything there. And I would say when Metallica enter into the whiskey fray, and we get bottles of Metallica whiskey sold that has been exposed to the music of Metallica, that's really just a marketing move.
Yeah, and my understanding is they're just playing the music of the Black Album because it's blackened. I could be wrong there. But boy, you think they'd choose a better album, right? Anyway, so there's that one thing. But let's think about whiskey production in a still, right? You mash your grains, right? You get your wort from the mash tun, you put it into the wash back, you pitch your yeast, you now have a wash, you distill it. Now the shape of that still, whether it has a reflux ball or something like that, or a line arm that goes really down on an angle, or maybe it's straight, or maybe it goes up on an angle, or maybe they have shell and tube condensers, or they have worm tubs. All of that affects the spirit as it's going through the process, right? Every bit of it. And at the end of it, you have this volatile chain of alcohols that gets put into cask to mature for the next 3 to 85 years, right? In a little nod to Gordon MacPhail with their soon to be 85-year-old whiskey here, and so I guess my point is, if you think of the cask as just yet another piece of equipment in the whiskey production process, you would think that vibrations will affect that, okay? And so let's work on that assumption that musical notes or music of some form, whether it's the sound or the vibration or the tonal quality or whatever, affects the whiskey in some way. And let's get to Ian Bruce's question. Like, what do you think jazz would do to a whiskey? You know, because I know you're a lover of jazz. What do you think that does to a whiskey? What could it do?
I'll get to that in a second. For me, I'm still thinking about somebody playing a tin whistle to a cask.
Yeah, right. What's that going to do?
Like if you're looking at big, heavy bass being played, like vibrations, right? Yeah. But a tin whistle just seems kind of light and passing over the top. I love the idea of the pipes being played, just as a good Scotsman, I just love the thought of the pipes screaming in a warehouse and how long you could potentially stand that for. But yeah, jazz, I think Mingus would do better than Eric Dolphy, but both collaborated in their day. But I think that stand-up bass of Mingus just hammering those bass lines, I think could really, given that we're going on this assumption that may very well have no scientific bearing at all, but I think if you could have Mingus hammering the bass, even that avant-garde style, God, he was so heavy. Eric Dolphy with the flute. Yeah, I think it's going to be much more of that tin whistle approach. I think it's gonna bounce off.
Yeah, but would heavy bass notes have a specific purpose and the light notes have something else, right? Do you get minty menthol notes from a tin flute and I don't know. I did, I kind of feel as if Ian Bruce sent this in having listened to some episodes. It's like, oh, Joshua's into prog rock. Let me ask this question. What'll prog rock do? Because that'll make him answer my question.
So come on then, prog rock and whiskey maturation.
Yeah, would it up the complexity? Like if you play Yeses Close to the Edge, would all of a sudden there be like this would it make for a more complex whiskey because you did that? And how long would you have to do that? Right? There's another question too, like just having this person, Allie, come by to play the tin flute. If you haven't
tin whistle,
sorry, tin whistle. You have an aged product, right? How much time is Allie going to be spending playing the tin whistle to the casks? Like at least our friends at Tuttletown, that's just that's what happens overnight. They would just play it overnight, every night. You're playing that. That, I think, could potentially have some sort of an effect. But if you're just like, hey, Allie, can you come in for 45 minutes and practice your next album?
And that's why, if you'll forgive me with the expression, that's why I think the sea maturation holds water. Thank you. I can really grasp whiskey or rum going into wood being loaded on a ship, and then spending months at rising and falling climates, right? Really having a lot of motion and vibration, but also heat, but then also cold. And so, like, current practices aside, and how much of that is real and how much of that is marketing, I can really get my head around sea transport playing some valid role in maturation. Music, for me, like, it's to your point, right? Like, you would have to play the music nonstop for months and really be bombarding it to vibrate that oak, to vibrate that liquid. And how much vibration are you really getting there? I just think the music aspect of it just really unfurls in a way that the water transport, I think, really holds up to investigation.
Yeah, it almost feels like someone arguing music does something for the aging of an aged product, whether it's whiskey or rum or maybe anything else, is a conspiracy theorist trying to explain why their conspiracy makes sense. When if you just sort of step back a little bit, you see this flaw and you see that flaw and then you see this gaping hole, and yeah.
Well, it's a non-falsifiable claim for the very reason that you set up earlier, which is there's no control. Yeah. And even if you set up a control, you couldn't demonstrate that the difference was because of the music. And I think if you've got casks sitting in a warehouse that are by their very nature maturing, and you say music makes a difference to this maturation, how? Like it's sitting there maturing anyway. When you come back after playing the album, 60,000 times, the whiskey will still have matured.
Yeah. Yeah, one last thing that I'll say, that this idea of ocean maturation goes back really far. It goes back actually to the transportation of Madeira around the world.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right? Part of the reason Madeira was so popular around the world is you'd have it produced on the Madeira Islands, and then you go south. You cross the equator. That tropical ocean aging affected the wine in such a way that it made it a more desirable wine than other wines. Yeah. And if you tasted the Madeira on the Madeira Islands, it would taste totally different because the wine didn't have that ocean travel. It didn't go across the equator. It didn't have those intense heat and cold. And anyway.
It would be interesting to take some whiskey and put it in a tote, like a food grade plastic drum, and play it music. And I hear the flaws within this as I'm speaking, but because I understand, like, it's the vibration, it's the passing through the oak. But what I'm trying to get at is, could you take liquid in a tote that you play music to and show that there's any kind of change? Any kind of change.
Okay, so are you saying, so let's say we have a cask of whiskey and there are 200 liters in there, and you take 100 liters and you put it into one tote, and you put another 100 liters and put it into another tote. Play music to one of those totes for a month, and then taste the two side by side and see if it's done anything?
Just as the beginning of something. Yeah, just as the beginning. Because I understand the idea is it's the music that's increasing the vibration, that's increasing the interaction with the oak, and that's what's accelerating maturation there. Like, so I understand the wood is an essential component to the maturation. But is there a way to show that just music by itself is making some change here without further complicating with the oak?
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, do you think, just like I've kind of freely admitted today, that I think there's something to ocean freight transport of maturing stock, do you think there's anything to this music. Music and maturation. Do you think there's anything there?
I feel as if there is a huge potential for there to be something there. Simply because, right, you can trace mouthfeel back to how grains are mashed. Meanwhile, the product of that grain has gone through a rigorous process, right? Including heat and water and like all of these things, right? And so I have to believe if a cask breathes in and out over the course of the year because of heat and cool, and if a cask the location of the cask can potentially affect flavor, I want to say physical vibration could potentially affect the whiskey. I just don't know what sort of test there would be to prove that. Because, again, every cask is completely different. And I take us back to that example of our Ben Riach, our two Ben Riachs, which were, the same age, same cask type, sitting next to one another and tasting totally different.
So you think there's potentially something there just by virtue of there being vibration and interaction with oak?
That there is. I just don't know how we could test that, and I also don't know if it even matters. Like, also, does it matter? If the distillery produces great whiskey, whether or not Allie plays the tin pipe, the tin flute, whatever instrument this person is playing.
Tin whistle. Uh-huh.
The tin whistle. Then in the end, it doesn't matter. In the end, we have a great little marketing story, and I hope the distillery gets a bit of notice from it. I hope Allie and the band gets a bit of notice because that's fun. But I don't know if it's anything more than it being fun. That's all. Maybe
the drums. Maybe using maturing casks as drums is the way forward.
But then, is it right? Is it Lars Ulrich playing the drums? Is it right? Is it
John Bonham?
Is it John Bonham playing the drums?
Let's get out of here on that. If you, dear listener, would like to be like Ian Bruce and have your story covered in an episode of Extra Extra, please go ahead and email us at questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. And just like in the headline of today's piece, there is no E in whiskey. And other than that, we'll be back for another round of Extra Extra in the not too distant future. You remain Joshua, I remain Jason. You all out there remain wonderful listeners. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. The cat has picked this exact moment to be let out the door that I just closed.
Oh, cats. You gotta love them.
Fucking hate them.
No, you gotta love them.
Nope.
Yep.
The opposite of that.
They're the best. They're far superior to dogs.
Fuck off. Man.
She saw that you weren't getting your steps
Ramblings of a madman. Okay.